Welcome to our lecture on nature and human well-being. The background to this slide is my old community garden, which was an oasis of green space in my urban neighborhood at the time. One topic we'll be discussing today is how green space in cities can impact the well-being of residents there. I can tell you anecdotally that having this garden in my neighborhood throughout the pandemic hugely impacted the well-being of my entire family. Today's lecture will begin with the family of the week. Then we'll explore the impacts of nature on human well-being. In these first two sections, I'll be highlighting some of the primary research behind the well-being impacts listed in your readings for this week. I think this is helpful because we'll be able to see precisely what measurable proxies researchers use to represent the amorphous ideas of both nature and human well-being. And we can also come to better understand some of the mechanisms that might be at play. We'll follow this with a few example initiatives that use nature to improve well-being in different ways. Our family of the week this week is the Cupressaceae, or cypress family, our first gymnosperm family of the week. This family includes cedars, cypresses, junipers, redwoods, and giant sequoias. I've included here a photo of one of the state trees of California, the coast redwood. Here I am standing among them at Armstrong Redwoods State Natural Reserve in Northern California. Redwoods are the tallest trees in the world, and you can't help but to feel a sense of awe when you're near them. We'll discuss how such feelings of awe from nature can impact our behavior in just a bit. Members of the Cupressaceae are mostly evergreen trees or shrubs, have small, scaly leaves or needles, or sometimes both, depending on age, and separate pollen-bearing and ovule-bearing cones, as you see in these photos of redwood cones right here. I chose this family today because one of its members, the Japanese hinoki cypress, is the subject of interesting research about how plant scents impact human well-being. The research on this tree focuses on its phytoncides, which are essential oils with the ecological role of defending against microbes and harmful insects, and which research has shown to strengthen humans' immune function and decrease stress. Let's take a closer look at one of the studies that uncovered this relationship. In the reading by Florence Williams, she describes a visit to Xing Li's lab in Tokyo to learn about his research. In his paper, Effect of Phytoncide from Trees on Human Natural Killer Cell Function, is the hotel room study she discusses. In this study, the aspect of nature they are looking at is the smell of the forest, as represented by the smell of hinoki, which was achieved by vaporizing stem oil in a humidifier. And the aspects of well-being they were measuring were related to human immune function, as represented by a number of lab results, but we will focus on natural killer activity and concentration. Natural killer cells, or NK cells, are a type of white blood cell that helps fight tumors and viruses. Having more of them is associated with stronger immune function. So, what they did was they put research subjects in urban hotel rooms for 3 nights, continuing to work during the days in between. And the hotel rooms had humidifiers vaporizing essential oils from hinoki. They took blood and urine samples at consistent times throughout the study, and here are some of their findings. Figure 2A, the one on the left, shows the effect of phytoncide exposure on NK activity. The gray bars show NK activity from subjects before being exposed to phytoncides, and the black bar on the right shows NK activity after exposure. You can see that there was a significant increase in activity. And figure 2b is a measurement of the amount of NK cells. And again, you can see that this increases after exposure to the hinoki scent. Lee and colleagues do not offer detailed hypotheses for the mechanism behind this effect. However, they do also show that two hormones related to stress, adrenaline and noradrenaline, decrease after hinoki exposure. Because previous research links these hormones with inhibited NK function, they conjecture that this change in stress level might be driving the change in NK activity and concentration. As you read this week, nature's impact on immune function is but one of many incredible ways different forms of nature impact various aspects of our individual and community well-being. I want to give a plug for an additional reading if you're interested in digging deeper. And it's this book by Florence Williams, the author of an article you read this week. It's called The Nature Fix: Why Nature Makes Us Happier, Healthier, and More Creative. The reason I like this book is because it's like a giant literature review on the subject, with references to many of the major primary research studies underlying what might sometimes seem like a laundry list of ways that nature impacts us. Speaking of lists, here I am going to summarize in list form some of the impacts described in your readings, as well as some from the book. But I'm then also going to home in on 3 of these to share with you some of the primary research behind them. As you heard on the Hidden Brain episode, more greenery in cities and neighborhoods has been associated with increased social cohesion, meaning knowing and being able to rely on your neighbors, decreased aggression, decreased crime, and improved mood. In the Williams article, she describes how taking a walk outside decreases stress, as evidenced by decreased cortisol levels, sympathetic nerve activity, blood pressure, and heart rate. And again, she describes the impact on immune function, as we just discussed. Other findings have shown that nature, again defined in different ways depending on the study, is associated with improved recovery from surgery, improved attention, increased activity, increased creativity, and even increased pro-social behavior. Let's now take a closer look at some of these, starting with improved recovery from surgery. In a classic article that took place in suburban Philadelphia, researchers looked at nature's impact on well-being in the context of recovery from surgery. In this case, they were looking specifically at the impact of views of nature. And in their study, this meant that recovery rooms looking onto a small stand of trees with leaves versus recovery rooms facing a brick wall. You can see here in their figure 1 that they compared patients in these rooms with patients in these rooms over the course of 6 years. And again, the aspect of well-being they investigated was how patients recovered from gallbladder surgery. And they evaluated this based on 5 criteria: number of days of hospitalization, amount and strength of analgesics, amount and strength of anxiety medication, minor complication, and nurse's notes, being coded as positive or negative. Some of these did not prove to be significantly different between groups, but they did find that patients in the rooms facing trees experienced a shorter recovery by about 1 full day on average and received fewer and weaker analgesics than the wall-facing patients. They also found that nurses wrote, on average, only about 1/3 as many negative notes about tree-facing patients than wall-facing patients. They did not hypothesize mechanisms for these differences, but it makes sense to think that many of the physiological impacts of nature that researchers are now learning about were likely at play here. Another study we'll zoom in on supports the association between nature and creativity. In this study, researchers were curious to know how our current high-technology indoor lives might be impacting higher-order cognitive reasoning. In this case, they look at nature in the context of full immersion in wilderness with no access to electronic technology. So their study subjects include 56 young adults who take part in outward bound trips for 4 to 6 days. The aspect of well-being they are interested in is creative thinking and problem solving, which they quantify through results on a test called the Remote Associates Test. This is a common measure of creative thinking in this field of research. They administered this test to some participants before their hike and to some participants after 4 days of hiking, while still out in the wilderness. When they compared test scores between subjects before their hikes and after day 4, they found that the day 4 group scored 50% higher on the RAT than the pre-hike group, indicating improved creative thinking and problem-solving capabilities. The researchers suggest some possible explanations for this. The first relates to attention restoration theory, which came up in your readings this week. This theory says that certain activities, like overuse of technology and multitasking, deplete our executive functioning and attention resources, while other activities, like interactions with nature, replenish these resources. They hypothesize that the increase in creativity they observed might be related to such a replenishment of attention. They also describe default mode networks of the brain that are active during restful introspection and may be important for the types of cognitive challenges they measured here. Research has shown that multimedia use disrupts these networks, and they think that time in wilderness and/or the fact that their subjects were entirely unplugged from technology may have improved these default mode networks, which then improved their creative thinking. But this brings me to mention one shortcoming of this study, which the authors acknowledge, and that is that they cannot separate the impacts of nature itself from the impacts of unplugging from technology. And the last close-up we'll take a look at here is about the research linking nature to increased pro-social behavior, or behavior that prioritizes others' needs over one's own, like sharing, caring, and assisting. In this experiment, the authors were specifically interested in living systems that inspire awe, that elicit awe. For their experiment, they represented this by a grove of very tall Tasmanian eucalyptus trees, exceeding 200 feet. They had half of their subjects gaze into these trees for 1 minute, and they had the other half gaze up at this tall building you see here on the right for 1 minute. Each study subject did their 1-minute gaze on their own, so not as a group. In terms of well-being, they were interested in pro-social behavior and degree of entitlement. They assessed this in 3 ways after the subjects gazed at either the trees or the building. First, they had the experimenter drop a box of pens, apparently accidentally, after each study subject's 1-minute gaze, and they counted how many pens the subject helped the experimenter pick up. Then, they asked the subject how they would behave in a few hypothetical situations, like if they would keep money given to them by accident. And last, they were given 3 psychological tests to measure their sense of entitlement. And what did they found? They found that the tree gazers gathered more pens, made more ethical decisions, and were rated as having reduced entitlement as compared to the building gazers. These results are pretty amazing, considering that such study subjects had only gazed at the trees for 1 minute. The authors propose that these well-being impacts were due to the following chain of associations. Natural phenomena that are particularly immense in size, scope, or complexity elicit awe. Awe results in what they call feelings of the small self, or a relatively diminished sense of self. And then, feelings of the small self influence one to behave in ways that prioritize others. Now we'll take a closer look at 3 of the initiatives you read about that seek to improve well-being through nature. The first is forest bathing, or Shinrin-yoku. As you read, Shinrin-yoku is a recent initiative with ancient roots. The term was coined by the Japanese government in 1982, but it is inspired by Shinto and Buddhist practices to experience nature with all 5 senses. Let's listen to Xing Li, the first author of the Hinoki study we talked about earlier, describe Shinrin-yoku and its role in Japan.
My name is Dr. Xing Li. I'm a physician at the Nippon Medical School Hospital, and I'm the president of the Japanese Society of Forest Medicine, and I have studied the forest medicine at Shinrin-yoku for 30 years. Shinrin-yoku directly translates to the forest bathing. It is something spending time in forest to promote the good health. In fact, the Shinrin-yoku is originated in Japan in 1980s and as a national health program to help the stressed workers and to reduce their stress. Now, there are about 62 forest therapy bases across Japan, and those bases provide the service with the blood pressure check and some aromatherapy course, also some work with the forest therapy guide was together get some beneficial effect from the forest bathing. Have long and fascinating roots into nature, especially into forest. 2/3 of the Japan are covered in forests. There are two major villages in Japan, Shindo and Buddhism. Both religions see forest as the realm of the divine. We even have the word karoshi, which means death from overwork. So it made sense for people to turn to forest to help. There are many beneficial effects on human health. For example, Shinrin-yoku can reduce blood pressure. Shinrin-yoku can reduce the stress hormone and stress situation. Shinrin-yoku also can reduce the blood sugar levels. The Xingniu can lift the depression. The Xingniu can improve the quality of sleep. The Xingniu also can boost your immune system, including the increase of natural killer cells and the activity of natural killer cells. Xingniu also can increase the anti-cancer proteins. The Xingniu can also improve the concentration and increase your memory. Yeah. You can visit a city park to enjoy Xingniu. In fact, in my research, 2 hours Xingniu in the city parks also can get many beneficial effects, like Xingniu can improve your positive feelings and reduce your negative feelings. In my personal experience, I always visit a small park near my office almost every day during the lunchtime. So if you have a small park near your home or near your office, you also can enjoy the city park during your lunchtime. You also can put some plants or flower in your home or in your office to enjoy the indoor park therapy. You also can produce some aroma by using the essential oil to produce some smell and to enjoy the sense of the smell of the indoor forest bathing.
A couple major themes stand out to me when listening to Li. First is the synthesis of different knowledge systems in Japan's development and practice of forest bathing, including both religion and scientific research. And the second is the fluidity between nature and the built environment. Even though Shinrin-yoku means forest bathing, Li does not suggest that people must go to a remote forest to take part in this practice. He suggests that people can forest bathe in city parks and even describes having houseplants as a form of what he calls indoor forest bathing. Relatedly, the next initiative we'll look at is biophilic cities. The name of this initiative comes from the concept of biophilia, which was popularized by evolutionary biologist E.O. Wilson in the 80s when he published his book, Biophilia. The simplest definition of this term is love of life, and Wilson uses it to describe humans' innate affinity for living things. The Biophilic Cities Network's vision is to partner with cities, scholars, and advocates from across the globe to build an understanding of the value and contribution of nature in cities to the lives of urban residents. You saw on the website that there are currently over 20 partner cities that support one another in pursuing what they call natureful cities, including cities both in the United States and abroad. In the interview that you read, Julia Aguiman, professor of urban and environmental policy and planning, presents some challenges to achieving such natureful cities in just and inclusive ways. For example, he cautions that many greening projects, like urban farms, are temporary and that they can harm communities when they draw attention and resources away from sustained economic development. He also discusses how there is what he calls an equity deficit in green sustainability discourse, and that justice-focused groups and environmental sustainability-focused groups need to work together. Relatedly, he describes the need for culturally inclusive practices. For example, projects that reflect the different ways that different people conceptualize and interact with nature. And in order to do this, he calls for organizations and planning committees to, quote unquote, look like the community. And last, he warns of ecological gentrification, or the possibility that greening will make a neighborhood attractive to developers and potentially result in the displacement of current residents. The reading you did on Nature RX programs was a chapter from a book about using nature to improve the mental health of college students. The programs described in the chapter you read do this in different and creative ways, but I'll focus here particularly on Cornell's program, which is called Nature RX. Cornell's program was developed in response to the growing mental health crisis on U.S. college campuses, which they describe extensively in a separate chapter, but includes, for example, more students seeking mental health services than ever before. Their program has 3 components. First is that Cornell health clinicians and mental health providers literally prescribe nature to students. They do so by giving out these prescription cards here. Notice that there's an indication for dosage. Interesting work at Cornell and elsewhere is actually investigating how the impacts of nature change over time spent in nature. For example, the authors cite research showing that the greatest improvements in self-reported well-being, the ability to concentrate, and cortisol levels occur after just 10 minutes in nature, and after that, the improvement occurs at a slower rate. This is to say that the dosage part of the card is not just a joke, but informed by an increasing body of evidence. The second component of their program is a Nature RX class, Plant Science 1125, which is a freshman seminar similar to the one you read about at UC Davis. As written in the Cornell course catalog, the course helps students develop closer relationships with nature so that they will add time in nature to their regular routines. And the third component is a website aimed at helping students get out into nature. The main way it does this is by listing nearby nature opportunities with all the information you would need to go out and enjoy them. So here's a screenshot from the website, and when I click on one of the options, in this case, the Mundy Wildflower Garden, I get information about how to get there, what you can do there, and how long you might want to stay. Pretty cool, don't you think? And that concludes our lecture on nature and human well-being. I hope you can now turn off your computers and go inside, even just for 10 minutes, to breathe deeply.